Fueled by hurricane-force winds, these fires have struck at a vulnerable time. LA hasn't seen any significant rainfall for months. Abandoned neighborhoods are now falling prey to crime.
In the midst of the emergency, we've all seen individuals who are targeting vulnerable communities by burglarizing and looting homes. This is simply unacceptable.
As dawn came in the Palisades, it revealed the grim reality of what the fire has left behind. There are miles and miles of streets like this, an utter shock at the devastation here. Communities just vanished, now ghost towns, and once dream homes turned to dust. No one is immune. Mansions now ash. The homes of Jennifer Aniston, Adam Sandler and Paris Hilton among those evacuated. And this was filmed by the wife of Take That star Mark Owen as they escaped through the flames. Some are returning to the ruins to see what remains.
Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. You guys sent in some really fascinating stuff about the LA wildfires, like articles and firsthand accounts and even some videos. It's going to be interesting to see what we pull out of this.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Yeah, we're talking about those fires that just ripped through LA, left a lot of destruction behind. But like amidst all that, there are some pretty incredible survival stories.
Yeah.
Like, David Steiner. This guy, he thought his $9 million Malibu mansion was toast.
Oh, wow.
But, and this is crazy, he gets a text from his wife. She calls it the last house standing.
Wow. I can't imagine.
His mansion was built with all this fire-resistant stuff, though, right? Like stucco walls, stone, a fireproof roof.
It sounds like a fortress.
Yeah. And that got me thinking, okay, so maybe this is just a rich guy who could afford to build a fortress, right? But, like, are there lessons here? Can we learn something about building codes from this, for fire-prone areas, even if you don't have millions of dollars?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, Steiner's mansion wasn't the only one that survived.
Right.
Remember the Walsh house from 90210?
Oh, yeah.
Untouched.
While stuff was burning all around it.
Yeah, it's just standing there, totally fine.
So there is a pattern here.
Yeah, there's got to be.
So what are these architectural choices that make such a difference?
Well, a lot of the surviving homes, they all had these things in common, right? Like solid concrete all around the perimeter, tempered glass windows,
Okay.
and they didn't have things like eaves or vents.
Okay. Why is that?
Embers.
Embers.
Embers. They can travel for miles, little burning pieces of stuff, and they can get caught, like in the eaves or vents, or even like a little crack in a window.
And then the whole house goes up.
Exactly.
So it's like not just about what you build with, but how you build it,
Exactly.
to stop those embers.
Yes. And another thing is the landscaping.
Okay, yeah.
Like around those surviving houses, a lot of them, it was all, well maintained. They used these fire-resistant plants, and there was space between the house and the trees.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so you compare that to a house surrounded by, like, dry brush.
Yeah, that's just fuel.
It's like an invitation for the fire.
It's interesting how something like landscaping can play such a big role.
It really shows you that being prepared for a wildfire isn't just about reacting when the fire's already there.
Yeah.
You've got to minimize the risk beforehand.
Right. But, I mean, even with the best preparation, these fires, they still caused a lot of damage, right? And it wasn't just about the people who lost their homes. I mean, whole communities were disrupted.
Absolutely.
I mean, they had to close schools because the air quality was so bad.
Yeah.
And there were evacuations, like, all over the place.
Yeah, and there were reports of looting, too, in some of those areas.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, adding more stress on top of everything else.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of stress, I mean, the human toll of these fires, like, it's easy to forget that even celebrities, they weren't immune to all this.
Yeah, big names lost their homes.
Yeah, like Paris Hilton, Mel Gibson, Billy Crystal.
Yeah, millions of dollars in losses.
Yeah.
And even if they have the money to rebuild, it's still got to be a huge blow.
Oh, yeah. Like, I was reading about Ricki Lake. She was talking about losing her dream home. And, for every celebrity who we hear about, there were so many regular families who went through the same thing.
Yeah. These fires, they're about more than just property damage, right? It's about people's lives being disrupted, like a sense of security being shattered. And it's going to take a lot to recover from that.
And speaking of recovering, I was reading this story about this pastor who was dropped by his insurance company.
Oh, wow.
After like 38 years.
Yeah.
Right before the fires.
Seriously?
Yeah. And it just highlights this insurance crisis that's been brewing in California.
Yeah, that's a big problem. Insurance, I mean, it's supposed to be there when disaster strikes, but in California, it's just getting harder and harder to find good insurance.
Especially in those areas that are prone to fires, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just a problem for homeowners, It's a much bigger problem. Could affect the whole state.
Yeah, you got to wonder what's going to happen to people trying to rebuild. Will insurance companies step up? Or will people be left to fend for themselves?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And that's just one of the many complex issues that these fires brought to light.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick pause here, and when we come back, we'll dive into some of those challenges, the potential solutions people are talking about.
Sounds good. Yeah, we were just talking about that insurance crisis, and how it's making it even harder for people to rebuild after losing everything.
Right. Like on top of the emotional toll, there's this huge financial burden.
Exactly. I mean, it's like these fires, they revealed how vulnerable we are. Not just our houses and stuff, but, the whole system that's supposed to protect us when something like this happens.
Like a wake-up call for the whole state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe. I mean, are you going to keep rebuilding the same way and just hope for the best?
Especially with climate change, right? Like these crazy weather events.
Yeah.
They're happening more often. They're more intense.
Yeah, absolutely. We got to create a future where we're more resilient, right? We can't just keep doing the same thing.
One thing that really stood out to me was all the political fighting that happened while the fires were still burning.
Oh, yeah. A lot of finger pointing going around.
Yeah, some people were blaming how the state manages the forests.
Right. Trump, he was really critical of how California handled the fires.
He even threatened to cut off funding for wildfire management.
Yeah. And then you had Governor Newsom. He wanted an investigation into why there wasn't enough water pressure in the fire hydrants.
Right. When the fires first started, it seemed like people were wondering if California was even ready for something this big.
Yeah. And I think those are fair questions. When lives are at stake and people's homes, we got to make sure everything's working the way it should. Right. Our emergency systems, our infrastructure.
But it wasn't all bad news.
Oh, yeah, definitely not. There were some really hopeful stories, too. Like that guy in El Tadena.
Oh, yeah.
The one who fought the fire himself.
With a garden hose.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It's amazing what people can do when they have to.
Totally inspiring.
And it wasn't just individuals, right? Neighbors helping neighbors, communities coming together to help those who lost everything.
Like setting aside their differences?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And even looking ahead, people were talking about long-term solutions, like managing the forests differently.
Right, like controlled burns to get rid of all the dry brush and stuff.
Yeah. And architects and builders, they were pushing for stricter rules.
Oh, yeah, about the materials you can use and how you design houses in those high-risk areas.
So making those fire-resistant features, like, mandatory.
It's like we have to build in a way that doesn't make things worse,
Right. And there were also some really interesting ideas about insurance.
Oh, yeah.
Like some people were saying, we need a whole new system.
Like a national program.
Yeah, for wildfire insurance, kind of like what they have for floods.
That makes sense, right? Because wildfires, they're not just a California problem anymore. It's everyone's problem.
Right. But even with all these ideas for the future, there's still the immediate problem, right? People need help now.
Absolutely. And we need to figure out how these fires started.
Yeah, if we know the cause, maybe we can prevent it from happening again.
Exactly. So I guess we should take a look at the investigations, what the experts are saying about where these fires came from.
Yeah, let's dive into that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, the aftermath, the human cost, the politics. But if we really want to stop this from happening again, I think we have to understand how these fires started in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. And it seems like the investigators, they pretty quickly ruled out a usual suspect.
What, like lightning?
Exactly. The weather reports, they show clear skies before the fire started. No thunderstorms, nothing like that.
So no lightning. What about power lines? I mean, those are often blamed, right?
Yeah.
Especially when everything's so dry.
Yeah, that's what people usually think of. But in this case, it doesn't really fit. Like those areas where the fire started, especially the Palisades fire, there weren't many power lines there. Or transformers.
Okay, so if it wasn't nature and it wasn't power lines, then what did start these fires?
Well, one of the sources I was looking at, it talked about the possibility of, people being involved.
Like arson.
Not necessarily on purpose, more like accidental fires. Apparently those little fires, they happen all the time in the woods around LA.
Started by whom?
Well, there's some talk about, homeless folks maybe starting fires to stay warm or to cook.
Oh.
But usually those fires are contained pretty quickly. They don't turn into massive wildfires like what we saw.
So what was different this time?
The Santa Ana Wains. That's the big difference. Everything was so dry, and then you get those winds like hurricane force. It's like it turns those small fires into raging infernos.
Yeah.
They spread so fast and they merge together. It creates this massive blaze, like the perfect storm.
So it's like one little spark can cause so much damage.
Yeah, because of the wind, the dry brush. It's like a chain reaction.
It really makes you think about how everything's connected. You know, the weather, what people do, the land itself.
It all plays a part, and
Yeah.
that makes finding solutions that much harder.
For sure. And I mean, we talked about some ideas, right? Better forest management, stricter building codes, rethinking insurance. But is anything actually happening?
I think there's definitely a sense of urgency now. You see residents speaking out, politicians, even the insurance companies are saying things need to change.
Okay, that's good. And what about us regular folks? What can we do to protect ourselves, our families, our communities?
Well, one of the most important things is creating what they call defensible space.
Defensible space.
Yeah, like around your house.
Yeah.
Clearing out the dry brush, keeping your gutters clean, planting things that are fire resistant.
Okay. And what if you don't live in an area that's prone to wildfires? Is there anything you can do?
Oh, absolutely. You can support groups that are working on prevention and relief. You can push for policies that address climate change. And just stay informed, It all makes a difference.
This has been really eye-opening. I mean, these fires, they're more than just a natural disaster, right?
Yeah.
They showed us how fragile things are. Our infrastructure, the systems we rely on, our way of life.
But they also showed us how strong we can be. The resilience, the compassion, how people come together to help each other and rebuild.
It's been a roller coaster, We heard stories of survival, stories of loss. We saw the blame game, and we saw incredible acts of courage.
Yeah. And hopefully we've all learned something from it.
Right. Because knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
The more we understand about these fires, the better prepared we'll be to prevent them, to face them, and to support each other when they happen. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with this thought. What are you going to do with what you've learned? How are you going to be part of the solution? Because ultimately, it's on all of us to create a future that's more resilient to these wildfires.
Thanks for joining us on this journey. We hope you'll keep exploring this topic, asking questions, and talking about it, because together we can create a world where wildfires aren't this constant threat, but a force of nature that we learn to live with and manage.